Be here at the Kolkata Literary Meet. I have attended every session that I can remember since it was inaugurated by Malavika Banerjee and Jeet Banerjee. I'm delighted particularly to be here at a session that involves two novelists, both producing strongly experimental and, in a sense, avant-garde fiction. The novels are very different from each other. On my right is Lukáš Cabala from Slovakia, and his novel, Will You Remember Trenchin, is forthcoming from Seagull Books, again another institution in our city. Seagull has brought us a great deal of literature from around the world, particularly from Europe, and has made a great deal of works that were previously unavailable to us, available in new translations directly from the original language. So Lukáš's book, Will You Remember Trenchin? I have read the draft that is now going through the press, I assume, and will shortly be in print. On my left is K. Sridhar, Krishnamurti Sridhar, whose book, Ajita, I read a few months ago. And again, this is a very outstanding, very remarkable novel, which spans time zones, particularly through two characters who are philosophers, but are also deeply human figures, imagined in their own time and space. And it is not that their lives are parallel to each other, but in a sense there is a kind of relationship established through the chapters of the novel across these spaces that separate them. It's slightly difficult to speak to this audience because I can't see any of you. It's very dark. We are brightly lit, but the audience is in darkness, which makes it a little difficult to manage this. But I would like to start today's conversation by reading out a very short passage from Lukáš's novel, Will You Remember Trenchin? And it seems to me very pertinent to what we are doing today. This is the passage. Few things will convince a person about the relativity of time better than sitting on a hard bench. This speaks to your experience as our audience. Vincent could have sworn they had been there the whole night. Afterwards, Isidore invited everyone for a walk through the underground. They passed through a long, slightly ascending and branching tunnel. At the intersection, they turned left into a stairwell. The stairs made several sharp turns, and their number was definitely unexpected. André and Isidore took turns talking as they walked. They spoke about the previous séance and its impact on the town. One could see more people with a book in hand. Many read on park benches or beneath the elms on the square. Now this has happened, this conversation is happening right after a book beautification society's meeting, which is called a séance in the town of Trenchin. And then one of them says, you know, a conversation with the author is frequently more possible through his book, as we discussed last time. That is, in person, a writer might be stingy with words, one of them said in an inexplicably apologetic tone. Well, I hope that the writers on the two sides of me will not be stingy with words, but it is true that in some senses, one knows an author better through her or his book than you know, directly when you meet them. Still, since I have begun by quoting from Lukáš's novel, let me ask Lukáš how you planned this novel. Lukáš runs an online used book store. And a central character in this novel, Will You Remember Trenchin, is the proprietor of a physical used book store. And the story is about a relationship that develops between him and his assistant in the shop, a girl called Laura, as well as a young woman called Tamara, who has come here from Israel and is also a character in Lukáš's projected novel, which he is writing. Laura has a son called Oliver, and the story is also partly about, the story is also partly about Oliver. So let me ask Lukáš a little bit to explain a little bit more about this novel and the structure of the novel.
Yeah, so I had this idea to write a novel from a Jewish part of the city, but we don't have like Jews in Trenchin these times because they disappeared, so to speak, during the Holocaust, during the Second World War. And our city was completely changed by this terrible, tragic event, because Jews, they had a lot of beautiful shops there and businesses, and they have also these societies, like societies for making city more beauty. So they were very active, and suddenly they disappeared. So I was like, okay, I would be happy to write a story where I can show the Trenchin how it would look if this terrible tragedy never happened. And actually, this Tamara, who is coming to Israel for looking for her roots, she somehow sees the Trenchin like it never happened. But she doesn't know that her view of Trenchin is different from another person's. And when she's speaking to Vincent about some bookshop, about particular bookshop of Leopold Gansel, he's slightly in shock. Like, what are you talking about? The shop there is no this shop for 100 years. But and she tells him that. You have to go there, and it's there on the corner. And he's like, okay, I don't know. And so, he will never know what is happening, because there is like a kind of a magic realism that I like, that there is something slightly like weird or, something unpredictable, and the reality is moving, and but you will never know what is happening. So that was my desire. And also, maybe I wanted to try how it can be if I had a physical bookshop, because we have only online bookshop. And I used for this actually city villa where my grandmother used to live. She passed away last autumn, actually. So I was very afraid when the book was published a few years ago. What will she said about it? So I bring it to her. She didn't know what is happening, and so I was waiting, and then she called me, and she was very proud that her house is in a book, in this way. So I was like, oh, there was a relief for me. And the last part, maybe the last part of the story is the relationship between Laura and Vincent. It's a pure friendship. It's not romantic. And she has this son who is like 5 or 8 years old during the story. And what I like on this relationship that between Vincent, who is a writer, also not only a seller in bookshop, he has some like a child soul inside, and that's why his interaction with Oliver are so authentic and funny. And this relationship was inspired by my relationship with my nephew, actually.
Thank you, Lukáš. That tells us something about this book, because, you know, while it is a gentle and in some ways a hopeful book, but as I was saying to Lukáš, it also has a kind of political subtext, not only because of a kind of fascism, an everyday fascism that operates and in the town, and you know, certain incidents of repression that take place, but also the history of the Holocaust. Many Eastern European towns, I visited Vilnius earlier this year, have a history of populations, Jewish populations, entirely wiped out during the Holocaust. Tamara, who is a character in the novel, has come from Israel to find her roots in Slovakia. She has grown up speaking Slovak with her family. And so she speaks Slovak very well, but she obviously can't find the places that to her are very real. But as you were just explaining, in some cases they either don't exist anymore, or they have not existed for 100 years. So there is this missing bookshop. In fact, this novel is a lot about books. I mean, there are many passages about books, and books donated, books read, used books, Laura concealing books in the wrong place so that the customers will not find them, and so on. But I'd like to turn at this point to Sridhar, because his novel is not like this, but there is a kind of double reality that is operating in that novel. I'll just explain a little bit about it. It's called Ajita, and one strand in the novel is about the life of a philosopher belonging to the Ajivikas, who were Charvakas, well, I mean, yes, but Ajivika sects, various of this time, of the around the 5th century BC. Around the 5th century BC, Buddhism, Jainism, and various types of Ajivika philosophy all grew up during this period that Karl Jaspers has called the Axial Age. And so Ajita is a Charvaka philosopher, and he comes from a very traditional background, but takes a more radical route until he becomes this Charvaka philosopher. On the other hand, there is another strand where you have a young man called Moksha, who is born into a communist family and grows up as more or less a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. And then, you know, his life, which is also a very interesting life, takes him a little further away from the hardline communism into which he was born or bred. The novel is, however, interesting to me for another reason, because Sridhar, who is himself a physicist, has, like many physicists and mathematicians, has developed, I don't know whether this is a recent thing or whether it has always been there, an interest in the Oulipo movement, where writers like Raymond Queneau and others, or Italo Calvino for that matter, set themselves a kind of technical problem that needs to be dealt with in the course of the novel. In Sridhar's case, the 26 chapters of his novel, each chapter is missing a letter of the alphabet. So each successive chapter, one letter of the alphabet is not used. So the task is to write that chapter in a perfectly natural way, as though nothing is missing, and yet one letter is actually missing. And the great triumph of this novel, and I mean, I am full of admiration for it, it's a deeply moving novel. The great triumph of this novel is that we are deeply absorbed in these characters and their lives and what happens to them and their philosophy, and do not actually notice that the letters are missing. So would you like to say a little bit?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think very much like in Lukáš's book, the missing elements form a very central part of my book. I mean, not just the missing letters, but the people who go missing from Moksh's life. Or in Ajita's story also, there are people like his lover's husband goes missing and so on. So the form of the book actually in some way mirrors what the book deals with also. And it's a fact of how we as human beings, especially humans in India, learn to cope with these. You know, we miss, I mean, people in our lives go away, and we make those adjustments needed to continue with our lives. And Moksh's life is an extreme example of how everyone is in his immediate surroundings starts disappearing. But we all go through it, and that was one of the central concerns of the novel. The form itself, I mean, yes, I got interested in the Oulipo some time back, and I found it fascinating. In fact, when I used to dabble in poetry, I often use metrical verse, I like to rhyme and so on. I found this exercise somewhat similar, and it was a challenge, so it's always more interesting when you write a novel with a challenge of leaving out one letter in each chapter. But as you said already, I think for me, to write a Oulipo novel but not miss out on affect was a very important thing, because I find where formalism becomes very important, there the novel content also becomes rather abstract. I wanted to stay away from that. Even though I was dealing with philosophers and so on, I wanted to keep the human elements very, very strongly in the novel. And I hope I've succeeded in doing that.
Thank you. I think you have succeeded. I mean, I said that I was very deeply moved by this novel. And on the one hand, I felt, I remembered corresponding with Sridhar after I read the novel first, and I suggested that he might look at Gita Hariharan's I Have Become the Tide, which also deals with the life of a medieval religious reformer and philosopher. But what strikes me about what is missing, that idea of something that is missing. Sridhar, you told me that you were writing the novel during the pandemic. And certainly, post-pandemic, our lives are full of these blank spaces where people used to be. I think that, for each of us, you look back at the past and you think of a peopled past, you think of all the people. It is not simply that you are grieving for them, it is that you feel that they should be there, but they are no longer there. There are these blank spaces. And they were important parts of our lives. We have to manage to cope, we have to keep on somehow. But one character in the novel, particularly the modern character, Moksh, at one point feels that everybody he comes into contact with in some way disappears or dies. That, that there is a kind of death touch in Moksh himself. Now, whether this is something to do with him with his name, Moksha, or whether it is something that, there is a kind of extra real or, supernatural element here. I'd like to ask you, I wanted to ask you more about mortality in this novel, this whole idea of mortality, and how you see it both in Ajita's life and in Moksha's life.
Yeah, can I backtrack a bit? The other impulse for writing this book was also to write about Ajita. Ajita was known in his time as Ajita Keshakamblin. It was not his name, it was a name that the Buddhists and Jains used for him. It was kind of a pejorative, and but he was a very famous philosopher of his time. And he was a Charvaka philosopher. The Charvakas are now, in fact, modern philosophy books recognize them as the first rigorous materialists. By materialists, I mean people who say that matter is primary. Okay? And for one, it's very strikingly like the modern scientific worldview, because in modern science, we believe that at a very elementary level, it's all just matter. It's some particles. These particles come together, form atoms. Atoms then make more complex molecules. Eventually, you get very complex molecules like proteins. You string these proteins together, and suddenly, lo and behold, somewhere life emerges. Okay? And how does life come out of inanimate matter? So this is still an unanswered question in modern science, but the core idea is that there is something called emergence. It's not that life is put in by hand. There is just matter, and when you have composites of matter, you have chunks of matter, then life somehow just emerges. So this idea of emergence actually drives a lot of research in modern science today, but it's my claim, and I stuck out my neck and have said it, that it was Ajita Keshakamblin or the Charvaka philosophers who for the very first time came up with the idea of emergence. This is not a, self-glorificatory thing saying we had plastic surgery or something like that. I mean, it's not at all that. In fact, in some ways counter to that, because when we advertise our country or when people see our country, they always think of it in terms of spirituality, in terms of also, we like to use the word Vedanta to, describe our Indian philosophies. But it's very important to also say that it was, first of all, that it was very pluralistic. There existed several different traditions, several philosophies. And a philosophy like this, come back to your question of mortality, there is a quote which is attributed to Ajita. He says that nothing survives death. Okay? The Buddha and a complete idiot will burn alike on the funeral pyre, and they'll take nothing beyond that. Whatever we know, whatever we think we are, whatever we possess, it's all over here. There are no afterbirths, there's no previous lives, it all ends here. So that's, for me, that was the provocation for the book. Why did someone 2,500 years ago arrive upon an idea like that? What were his life experiences? What did he go through that he came upon a philosophy of this kind? And it's in contrast, Moksha, for example, having seen so many deaths in his family, softens his materialism, so to speak, moves from a very hardcore Marxism to accepting certain Buddhist practices, which he learns in Dharamshala, and he modifies his own very rigorous materialistic stance. It's also basically a way of expressing our own predicament. While we, at one level, accept a scientific worldview, when it comes to our own kith and kin, and when we lose very dear ones, we cannot help but grieve. And that grief exists, that human emotion exists in spite of anything that science will tell us. So this coexistence and this contradiction and the tension between these two is also brought in between Ajita and Moksha's own stories. Sorry if I took a little too long.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Lukáš to ask him about the fact that you mentioned magical realism. And your novel, while it is not about the afterlife, and it is certainly not really proposing that these characters live on, nevertheless, it does speak, it does use a limited, some sort of forays into unexplained events. Vincent particularly feels quite nervous in his flat above the bookstore because he feels that there is some kind of something going on, somebody that is changing, rearranging the furniture, closing the door, placing the chair or whatever, which should not be there. And then he goes and stays in Laura's flat with her. So there is that, but there is also in the book generally a very strong argument, I felt, for the continued life of books. And it struck me as very interesting. Of course, this may be a feature of the translation, which I am not competent to pronounce on, that the meetings of the Book Beautification Society are called séances. And for us, a séance is something in which you call up the spirits of the dead. Now, of course, in a sense, books do summon up the spirits of the dead. And there is this peculiar element in the book where Laura is slightly jealous of Tamara. She thinks that who is this person? She actually exists, but she should be actually just a character in Vincent's book. Initially, she was just a character in Vincent's book, and yet it turns out that she exists. Tamara also says to Laura, oh, you exist too. I didn't expect you to exist. So these characters, who are of course characters in Lukáš's novel, are also slightly uncertain of the level at which they inhabit material worlds or whether they are characters in books. Do you think that this whole theme of the book, the used book, the book that is passed on from hand to hand and therefore has different lives in different contexts, that is a kind of proposition of afterlives in your book?
Yeah, I think so, and that's why I called it seance, exactly as you said, because through this seance, there are these two guys who are like moderating the seance, but they are actually like they are sons of the Leopold Gansel, who is the owner of that 100-year-old bookshop. But of course, Vincent and Laura, they don't know that these guys are some related to the Leopold Gansel. So yeah, and actually in that excerpt you have read, there is also like seance, because there is in another part of this chapter, there is described one character who is sitting there, who is just sitting there, and if you knew this photo of Alan Edgar Poe, I'm describing him without mentioning him. So it's like there were his ghost. And Leopold Gansel, he published few books. One was few novels actually, just a few. And one of them was from Alan Edgar Poe. The other one was from Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, and so on. So, and this society, it is secret, but everybody can be part of this society. Yeah. Just if you take a book to the city with you and you will read, you are the part of this society, because you are making like marketing for books, so to speak. You are making some example, like you are walking example, and I like it personally to have a book with myself, because often I get this question, what can we do to make people read more? You can read yourself, and that's the most you can do. And if can somebody see you when you're reading, maybe it will help, because especially me, when I'm walking in the city or when I'm in the bus, and when I see somebody with book, for me it's like, yes, this is something that I want to see, and it's great. And I'm always curious what he has. So I'm trying to read the title, so everybody can be part of this society.
Yes, actually, I had sort of noted down some of these passages. I found it very interesting to read a book in progress, because the translation, was that I was sent is something, it's not, it's a draft. So just reading a little bit from an early passage. So much was happening, Laura thought. Not long ago, she had gone to the nighttime séance with Vincent, and since then, she has been seeing people with books all over town. A grandma was sitting on a bench feeding pigeons, and on her lap, she had open a thick novel. A taxi driver was waiting for a passenger by the synagogue and reading. A little girl was flipping through a fairy tale in front of a school. Something's going on, she said to herself. Or had it always been like that and she just didn't notice? Out of the question, if there was one thing she always noticed, it was a book in someone's hands. So something had really changed. After all, a book in hand was like the secret sign of the Trenchin Book Beautification Society. So, it's like an underground society that is propelled by the reading of books. Now, of course, this also, in a sense, reminds us of periods of repressive, autocratic, repressive rule, maybe during the Soviet regime in Moscow, an underground where books are passed around, books that are banned in the country are passed around. But the time of the novel is not really that. The time is not the period of the Cold War. So it's as though there is a kind of book revival being sought to be driven by members of the Trenchin Book Beautification Society. We don't have a great deal of time, so I was wondering whether our authors would like to read a passage from each of you, read a passage from your novels. Maybe we can just bring back the discussion to what you read. Thank you. Starting with Sridhar.
Moksh lives in Bombay, and in Bombay, in fact, on 26th July 2005, there were torrential rains and floods, and it was a very, very, I mean, we all went through a lot of panic at that time, out of concern for people who were stuck in the floods. So this had to come out in my novel somewhere, and it happens with Moksh's wife. Moksh's wife is called Geet, and Geet has gone to that part of Bombay where the floods were very heavy, and she, I mean, she's just disappeared. I mean, there's no news of her. Okay. And Moksh is waiting for her at home. After disconnecting the call, Moksh moves to the balcony and sits on the large swing that hangs from the door frame. It is Geet's favorite spot in the house, where she spends every morning with her cup of tea, listening to the birds chirping in the trees. It is that time of the evening now, when the day is giving way to darkness, and in that crepuscular haze of twilight, as Moksh lies back suspended in mid-air, he realizes that he is simultaneously occupying three boundaries: between the day and the night, between the earth and the sky, and between the inside and the outside. On the threshold, the limen, the domain of liminality. It is the failing light that often reveals the invisible, and it now becomes apparent to Moksh that there is also a fourth boundary, that is staring him in the face, the one between life and death. That is the boundary that is that brings out most sharply the slippery character of Hermes, the messenger of Zeus, who is the god of the liminal, the lord of all boundaries, including the one between life and death. It is a boundary that is replete with deceit and illusion, but then Hermes is also the guide to the wayfarer, bidding him to take a turn, a hermeneutic turn, so as to be able to delve deeper into domains that are liminal.
Thank you. That was a really remarkable passage about liminality and, placed in this crepuscular moment of twilight, with Moksh waiting for information about his missing wife Geet and thinking about the very thin line between life and death. I think that what would be good is if Lukáš also read a passage, and then maybe we can sort of discuss a little further.
But did anyone notice what letter was missing there?
Did you notice?
Anyway, I've played this game with other audiences.
I'm thinking how to make it shorter.
No, so just read a bit of it, not the whole of it. Just maybe 2 paragraphs. Yeah.
Okay. This chapter is called Escape. One night, Vincent was brushing his teeth in the upstairs bathroom. The door was half closed. It must have been really late, maybe 1:30 or 2 in the morning. He had watched the movie all the way to the end instead of splitting it in half as usual. All of a sudden, the lights went out. Perhaps the current had lost its thread for a few seconds, or a light bulb had hesitated. When they came back on, he immediately sensed that something was off. A long chair stood by the door, which opened into the bathroom. The bathroom was one of the smallest rooms in the house. It had no nooks or cabinets. There was nowhere to hide in it. Normally the chair was under the window by the toilet. He kept an open book on it. Why was it suddenly here? Shivers ran down his spine. He spat out the rest of the toothpaste and tried to feel his heart. It occurred to him that he could pass out at any point. He moved aside that revolting piece of furniture, yanked at the door, and ran into his room as quickly as he could. First he pulled over the moving wall with a bookshelf, then he slammed the door and locked it. He heard a quiet whimpering, and it took him a long time to realize that the sound was coming from his throat. He sat down on the bed and pressed his knees to his chest. This way he'd disappear into himself. He couldn't answer the most important question of his life. What, for Christ's sake, was the chair doing there? He hadn't put it there, and no one else could have done it because they couldn't have closed the door behind themselves in such a manner that the chair would stay right by it. Maybe he'd fall asleep or fall unconscious. It didn't matter, just let it be morning already. Let him hear Laura slamming doors already.
Right. Thank you for reading exactly the passage that I was remembering about this sort of slightly uncanny character to the narration. Because not only are the meetings between the characters in the book, the nighttime, midnight seances with books, slightly uncanny, the lives of the characters have this somewhat uncanny feel to them. At the end of the novel, these characters presumably are no longer alive. I'm not quite sure what has happened to them, but it is Oliver who is a speaker or a character whom we note at the end of the novel. And Oliver lives in Chicago, right? Chicago, somewhere in the US. And he's now a stand-up comedian, and he tells stories about Trenching. And he's, in a sense, he's trying to keep those memories alive. The title of the novel will you remember trenching, is, I don't know who it is addressed to, but maybe it is addressed to Oliver, who is the child, who was a child during the course of the novel, and later is keeping these memories alive by remembering these stories about his, this uncle-like figure, Vincent, and Laura, his mother, and other people whom he knew. So you have these two very different passages that we've just heard. In both cases, we have a male figure overcome by fear and doubt and experiencing a moment of great vulnerability. And not, obviously, I mean, it is as though that vulnerability is something that they have to accept, because they are, you know, they are in a world where everything is precarious, where anything can be taken away from you at any moment. I wonder whether, you know, the two of you have any questions for each other, after which we could open it up to the audience.
I would have a lot of questions about your work at CERN, because for me, like Switzerland's CERN is something, if I would work there, I would write like 5 sci-fi books, definitely, in a few years.
Yeah. No, so when I decided to write novels or literary works, I stayed away from science as such. Though, I mean, science speaks to my novel in a kind of subcutaneous way, maybe. But yes, because partly for me, it was actually the human experience that I wanted to describe through my novel. And at another level, you know, I'm a theoretical physicist, and like many other theoretical physicists in CERN and in other places, much of our work that we do is so far away from reality. I mean, it never sees the reality of experiments. So that is one kind of fiction. So I like to describe that part of my work as academic fiction, and this is non-academic fiction, if you like.
Well, on that note, I wonder whether we could open the session to questions from the audience. The audience is now visible, though there are now these blank spaces where people used to be, because it's getting late, and I realize that people must have other things to get to.
Even the audience has become Ulipo.
Exactly, it has become Ulipo. And you can play a game, Sridhar, by counting how many spaces are vacant in each row, and whether there can be any, you know, mathematical trick that one can play, or a mathematical game that one can play by counting these spaces. Still, I think I'd like to invite questions, and maybe we can have more discussion on the basis of these questions.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. My question is for Dr. Sridhar. I haven't read the book, but I'm assuming that the connection between Moksha and Ajita stories blurring into one another resembles something like a Mobius strip, which in turn resembles the samsara or cyclical time in a lot of Indic mythology. Now, is this kind of connection between Moksha and Ajita kind of philosophical, epistemological connection, or do you feel that the metaphysics or ontology or the basic conception of space-time in the novel contradicts Ajita's more materialist Charvaka rejection of samsara? And would you think that this book creates a kind of cohesion and conflict between religious and mythological conceptions of space-time and more scientific falsifiable conceptions of space-time? And would you prefer that the audience sees a kind of conflict or a kind of cohesion or a preference of one formulation of space-time over the other one?
As I said, I'm not directly dealing with anything very scientific in the book. There is a tension that, in fact, it's built up to the climax of the book, and there's a kind of tension between the Moksha worldview and the Ajita worldview, which I play around with. The structure of the book, so you should read it actually. The Mobius strip is actually the structure of the book. For people who don't know the Mobius strip, if you have a circle, I mean, if you have a circular strip of paper, instead of having a circular strip, if you twist the paper and you were to join it with a twist in the middle, that is called a Mobius strip, and it has some unusual properties. And this book is like that. It kind of loops back into itself with a twist in it. And so if you read this book, you would understand the structure of it better. So the Mobius actually refers to a structural game that I'm playing in the book.
Any more questions? Yes. Thank you. Shubha. Could we have a mic here for...
Thank you for this very engaging session. Thanks to all of you. Sridhar, thank you for the book. It's a fascinating book. But I was wondering, you know, it has...
We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It has this... I felt that it is organized along mathematical planes. And I also felt that there were, I mean, you were, because of your engagement with, with all these literary experiments, I was also wondering whether whether, you know, when you were talking about the void, the absence of a word, the lipogram, whether you were also thinking, you know, I also felt that it was probably not just, I mean, you are absolutely, it is true that it is a void in our lives, but also the absence, you know, people missing who go missing in the novel. But also I was wondering if there was also a slight void somewhere. You know, I was thinking of the book A Void by Perec, and which also has the letter E missing. So, and there it is, you know, it is linked with the theme. Your lipogram is also linked with the theme, but I was also wondering if it is also linked with another theme which I felt was, you know, was there often, and that was that it was, you know, there was something in all their convictions, in all their thoughts, in all the thought processes, and in what they were doing. There was also somewhere a kind of hesitance, you know, sometimes a feeling that maybe they were not going the right way. There were questions, there were debates. So all this, so would the void also, would the lipogram also suggest this engagement with thought processes where even in the most convincing, where one is really convinced about thoughts within oneself, or, you know, systems one is working with, whether even there would be something which would bring in certain kinds of hesitance, certain kinds of questionings, certain kinds of you know, not really belief, but, you know, moments of non-recognition, or, you know, something of this sort?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, okay, thanks for referring to Perec. In fact, Perec was one of the inspirations for this book, and I actually play the game of referring to Perec in the book. And so there's a reference to his work. In fact, in French, it's called La Disparition, and it's translated in English as a void. And when it was translated in English also, it was written without an E. So it was quite a remarkable translation. Thanks for that reference. Yes, this lipogrammatic structure operates at several levels. It is on one, it's actually people missing, but it also refers to other things. Like, I would say the gap that Ajita encounters after his conversation with the Buddha. You know, when Buddha points out to him the gap in his thinking, because he has not thought through the ethical problem completely. That if you ground something in rigorous materialism, why should then people act ethically? What is the basis of ethical action? And that it actually hits him very hard. So yes, there are those things, but there is one thing I'm obsessed with, even in my previous book, and that is this body and soul issue. And this missing soul thing in materialism is also one of the things I play with, in fact.
Thank you. I think there's a question there which I can't really see the person, but please do ask your question. Thank you.
Okay, this is to Dr. Sridhar again. Regarding materialism, you said there was an example when Ajita says, when Buddha and an idiot both are burned, nothing remains. And Buddha also, actually, what would you say about Buddha's, from your perspective, what is Buddha's position? He did not, never claimed anything about something remaining after the body, like anatma, number one.
Actually,
number two,
sorry sir, may I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah.
I puzzled over this question so much that I wrote a book about it. If you read it, I think a lot of the answers will be there. Okay. At least whatever I have to answer, I mean, I'm not saying this is the definitive answer, but whatever I have to answer, I've poured it out in this book. This is precisely the question that Buddha asks him. Why should people act ethically if there is no God, there is no soul, there is no heaven, there is no afterlife? Why should people act ethically? So Buddhism actually, even when it denies the existence of a permanent self, has the whole cycle of births and rebirths. And for that, there is karma. Okay. But the Charvakas don't even believe in karma. I don't want to make this discussion too technical philosophically, but this is precisely the thing that I've discussed in the book. So please.
Just adding on to that.
Yeah.
In modern physics, is matter the fundamental constituent, or is it energy and consciousness?
There is no consciousness at all.
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Heisenberg is uncertain, but there is no consciousness at all. It's all ultimately only matter and energy, which is, in some sense, matter and energy are equivalent at that level, at that microscopic level. And yeah, so when we say material, energy is also included in it. This energy is not some kind of spiritual energy or consciousness or anything to do with the domain of psyche or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that, Ambedkar also, and Ambedkarite Buddhism does not believe in karma or the afterlife or reincarnation. So there can be a variety of Buddhism that does not accept Navayana, yes. Any questions to Lukáš? Oh yeah, here. So that is the last question we'll take. We have to close the session after this.
I wanted to ask you, how has your bibliophilia informed your writing? And I read the excerpt that was published in Outlook after, I think, your session at the Kerala Literature Festival. And it ended with that enigmatic sentence, maybe this is what a cosmopolitan city looks like. So how has the city of Trenčín, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, how has that informed your fiction, especially this particular book?
Trenčín is actually a very small city. It has only 60,000 people. And especially in my first book, I made Trenčín megalopolis. There is like a million people, and it has metro and so on. So Trenčín as a cosmopolitan city is more my wish than reality, I'm a lover of a cosmopolitan city. I love cosmopolitan and diversity, but Trenčín is just a small European city, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I'd like to, we have to close now, but I'd like to just quickly, on that note about cosmopolitan cities, perhaps we might close as we began with a quotation from Lukáš's novel. So we have Oliver. Oliver speaking to his audience. He stared into the room. He saw the last people leaving, which we will soon see in front of us. The end of the world could look like this. In the distance, we'd see lights turning off, some trash would be left on the ground behind us, and someone would close the door with a creak. And it'd be surprisingly nice, except there wouldn't be another new morning. He walked off stage, picked up his pay, and slipped out the back door. Rusty fire escapes covered the walls, and smoke was rising from the half-open manhole cover. Oliver felt the cold night air on his face. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, stuck one in his mouth, lit it, and stepped out into the streets of Chicago. Chicago is a cosmopolitan city, and this is the end of the world imagined in a cosmopolitan city. Thank you all
if
for
I
being
may add
here.
one thing, I mean, there is a very, very strong reference to cosmopolitanism, about urban living in Ajita, because Vaishali and these places were the first cities almost anywhere in the world. And, you know, the idea of city life, of governance by people, all those things were taking root at that time. And a lot of that discussion happens here too.
Yeah, second urbanization period, absolutely. And in fact, you know, Buddhism and these religions are all connected with this idea of urbanization. Thank you very much. It's a very important point, and this idea of cosmopolitanism, as Sridhar lives in Mumbai, which is the most cosmopolitan city in India, and the fact that his character Moksh is also at some point an inhabitant of Mumbai and then London. This idea about cosmopolitanism, what we think about, what we do, the people we meet, and how we function in the world, it's something that we need to maybe work out for ourselves more. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our three panelists. Thank you to our three panelists for ending the day at Kalam Hub with such an interesting session. And it was really insightful on everything to hear from you all. This is a goodbye for today, and we shall see each other tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. at the Kalam Hub. Thank you so much for everybody.